This is the third of a three-part talk. In the first episode, we asked a painful but honest question. If I don't become Jewish, is there a place for me in this Torah community? In the second, we asked something that's more practical. What does it actually look like to live as a Noahide? With prayer, study, and community, without imitation. So tonight the question becomes even simpler and more concrete. If this path is real, what's my job? What does my responsibility actually look like? Not in theory, not in philosophy, not as a personal spiritual mood, but in real life, among real people, over time. Because faith that remains only private eventually weakens, and faith that never takes responsibility never matures. The 7 laws of Noah are not a modern idea. Already in the opening chapters of the Torah, humanity is addressed as morally accountable before God. First with Adam, look at Genesis chapters 1 and 2, and then explicitly after the flood, when God speaks to Noah and his descendants as humanity as such. Look at Genesis chapter 9, verses 1 through 7. The Gemara in Sanhedrin speaks about it and codifies these obligations as 7 foundational categories. These things appear in the Torah long before Sinai, beginning with Adam, clarified with Noah. And after the flood, humanity is addressed as humanity, not as tribes, not as nations, not as religions, but moral agents accountable to God. And later, during the biblical period, and especially in the Second Temple era, we encounter a group known as Yirei Hashem, or Yirei Shamayim, or in English, God-fearers, which is a category that's already implied in the Tanakh. If you look at Psalms chapter 115, verse 11. And it's also described explicitly in Second Temple era sources. Who are these people? These are non-Jews who rejected idolatry, accepted the God of Israel, practiced justice and charity, prayed, and attached themselves to Jewish communities without converting. And they were not considered or treated as outsiders. Josephus describes such God-fearers as attached to Jewish communal life, if you look at Antiquities in the 14th chapter. And other Second Temple era sources and early Roman period texts attest to non-Jews praying, learning, and attaching themselves to synagogue without conversion. There are actually some passages in the book of Acts, far be it for me to quote from there, but there are passages there that preserve historical traces of this phenomenon. What's a little bit disturbing to me about it is that they're described there as God-fearers. Then Paul comes around and sort of brings them to the end of his line, which is Jesus. So in other words, they were going in the right direction, and Paul just messes things up for them. But what does it teach us? It teaches us that this underlying category of people called God-fearers itself predates and stands independent of Christian theology. These were the righteous among the nations. Now, of course, history then takes a sharp turn. You have the rise of missionary religions, which demanded uniform belief and identity. Empires, which enforced theology. Moral responsibility of the individual and the community was replaced with conversion or coercion. The Noahide framework didn't disappear, though, but it went dormant. Only in the modern era, with global communication such as we have now, freedom of conscience, and the collapse of enforced belief, has it become possible again for the universal moral covenant to exist without coercion. And something else happened in our time. The Jewish people have returned to their land. I don't know if you're aware, but more than half of the world's Jewish population lives in the land of Israel today. Israel has been reborn. The prophets in Tanakh describe this not as an isolated event, but as part of a larger unfolding, where the nations turn towards Jerusalem, not to become Israel, but to serve God. And this theme already appears at the birth of Israel as a people. In Parshat Ve'era, Pharaoh is told repeatedly that the signs, wonders, and plagues of the Exodus are not only a punishment, but they are a revelation. Look at Exodus chapters 7 through 10. Pharaoh was the most powerful king of the most advanced empire of his time. And he's deliberately kept alive so that Egypt will know. Chapter 9, verse 16. But for this reason I have kept you alive, to show you my power, says Hashem, and so that my name will be proclaimed throughout the earth. It's about the world, the whole world becoming God conscious. Even Pharaoh himself, who was really the antagonist of that story, he's addressed as a moral subject. Someone who's meant to recognize God and proclaim his name. So we see from there and from many other places that this universal horizon has always been embedded in the Torah itself. And the prophet Zechariah speaks explicitly of a future where the nations ascend to Jerusalem on Sukkot, not to become Israel, but to recognize the kingship of Hashem. See chapter 14, verse 9, and verses 16 through 19. That vision assumes something crucial. Israel restored in its land, and the nations standing alongside, each in their role. So that's why the absence of mature Noahide civilization is not a failure. It's a sign that we're early. We're just beginning now. Now, one of the most common frustrations that I hear voiced by Noahides is, where is our community? And it's an honest question, and it's a necessary question. But the Torah always builds in a specific order. First, people. Then, what the obligation of those people is. And finally, structure. We see that Judaism did not begin with synagogues, prayer books, or schools. The Mishnah reminds us that civilization itself rests on Torah, on the service of God, and on acts of kindness. That's in Pirkei Avot, 1st chapter, 2nd Mishnah. Meaning that these are lived realities before they become institutions. Historically, even the God-fearers attached themselves to existing Jewish communal spaces, especially synagogues. Again, not as converts, but as learners and as moral participants. These functioned as centers of prayer, teaching, and ethical formation long before they were formal institutions, like the ones that we see today. See, every civilization begins organically with families, with elders, courts, shared responsibility, and living teachers. So the same must be true here. Now, today there are many Noahide spaces. We have organizations like this one, Sukkot Shalom, which offers classes and lectures and Tehillim groups and an opportunity to meet other people in this space. But we're not the only one. There are other online study groups and discussion forums. There are social media communities across platforms. There are YouTube channels. There are recorded shiurim. All of these things play an important role, especially at this early stage. But we have to be honest about the limits of these things. Because not every space offers structure. Not every group offers depth. Not every teacher offers reliable guidance. And watching videos, even excellent ones, cannot on its own replace accountability, relationship, like real relationship, shared responsibility, and real human presence. The Torah was never meant to be absorbed passively the way we absorb things through social media. It's lived. It's transmitted, questioned, and corrected in community. The way I see it, Noahide life will grow through small local groups, through shared learning under qualified guidance, an ethical commitment in daily life, and relationships with observant Jewish communities. Institutions do not create community, but community creates institutions. Now, can there be leadership without clergy? A Noahide civilization will not look like a mirror of Jewish life. Halachically, the Torah is explicit that the Noahide covenant is distinct from the covenant at Sinai. We see that in the Gemara in Sanhedrin, in the Rambam, Mishnah Torah, in Hilchot Melachim, chapters 8 through 10. There's no Noahide priesthood. There's no independent or parallel clergy, and there's no replacement for rabbinic authority. But this does not mean that leadership can exist without clergy. The Torah itself insists that moral and legal clarity requires qualified authority and living teachers. Look at Deuteronomy chapter 17, verses 8 through 11. And the Rambam applies this principle explicitly to Noahides as well. And that means that rabbis are essential, along with qualified Jewish teachers, including educated female teachers, who are fully capable of guiding and teaching and transmitting Torah responsibly. Not as rulers of Noahides, people will want to control them, and not as converts in waiting, but as teachers and guides and guardians of Torah clarity. That's what we all need. A Noahide civilization cannot supervise itself in isolation. It needs ongoing relationship with qualified rabbinic authority, qualified teachers. Again, not as governance, but as an anchor. But within that framework, leadership will still be required. And now I'm turning towards you guys. Leadership means teachers who know the 7 laws deeply and responsibly. Organizers who build ethical frameworks without inventing religion. Judges who understand justice as Torah understands justice. Philanthropists who fund moral and educational infrastructure, because that's what we're needing. And very concretely, it means creating structures for learning. The fact is that Noahides will have to take responsibility for building environments where serious Torah learning can actually happen. That includes learning centers, whether these are local or regional, online programs that are guided, that are accountable, that are curated, conferences and gatherings that bring people together in person. These things already do happen, but we need more of it. And Yemei Iyun, this is something that is well known in the Torah observant community. These are focused days of study led by qualified teachers. These are not luxuries. And like every enduring faith civilization, this work must begin with the youngest members of our societies. Faith communities do not start their education with adults. They start with children. If Noahide life is to mature, it will require educational materials that are designed for kids, frameworks for families to transmit values, schools, camps, and youth programs that are developed responsibly, and spaces where the next generation experiences moral life as belonging, not just as theory. A civilization that does not teach its children doesn't survive. That's how a civilization learns to think and speak and act responsibly over time. And the leadership that we're talking about here is responsibility. It's not hierarchy. And it must always remain under Torah guidance without pretending to be Torah authority. So, what is Israel's role in all this? What's the people of Israel's role in all of this? It's not to rule the nations. It's to teach. That's their role. That's what they were chosen to do. People sometimes ask why the Jewish people didn't actively teach the Noahide laws throughout history. I sometimes hear this question with not a small degree of resentment in it. But I mean, for the last 2,000 years, we have to understand that Jews lived as a very vulnerable minority, exiled, persecuted, restricted, often forbidden from teaching Torah to anyone outside their own community on pain of death. Our survival required inward focus. Transmission required preservation. That's a historical reality which explains the silence. Not indifference, and certainly not rejection. But this is even more of a reason why, if Noahides want to benefit from their knowledge, the knowledge of the Jewish community, and their guidance, they need to establish opportunities for this. They need to invite these teachers. We hear from, "For Torah shall go forth from Zion. Ki mitzion teitze Torah." Teaching doesn't mean pressure, but it means clarity. You know, there's been a number of if you've heard of the new atheists, public intellectuals, either who left their previous religions or just simply atheists. And over the last few years, a number of them have turned towards Christianity, which I thought was interesting. And I asked myself the question, like, why didn't they pick Judaism? The fact is that I think that Judaism has kind of a best kept secret quality. It's not really out there in the public sphere. It might look inaccessible. And the fact is that Judaism does not export itself, right? It doesn't spread through missions or pressure or fear or demands that everyone become the same thing. We see in the Psalms, chapter 24, verse 1, L'Hashem ha'aretz u'molo'o. The earth is Hashem's and all that fills it. And as Zechariah affirms, V'haya Hashem l'melech al kol ha'aretz. There's going to come a day where Hashem will be king over all of the earth. This is chapter 14, verse 9. It doesn't measure truth by numbers or conquest or replacement. God's kingship, the consciousness of God's kingship, does not depend on recruitment. So Judaism illuminates. It reveals what's already true. We find this throughout our liturgy, that the whole world already belongs to Hashem, that moral responsibility already applies to every human being, and that different peoples can serve the same God through different covenants. A Noahide civilization grows alongside Israel, not over it and not instead of it. We have different roles. We have one God. Because this identity is new, of course, there will have to be experimentation. But the Torah demands something critical. Experimentation must be guided. Chazal warn that sincerity alone does not guarantee truth or safety, which is why even non-Jews who study Torah are praised specifically when they study what pertains to their obligations. We see that in Avodah Zarah, we see that in Sanhedrin. Not every sincere idea is a good one. Not every spiritual impulse is safe. The task is not to invent something. It's to discover it. So, what are the first steps? Actually, they're surprisingly simple, and they're very human. People must come together. They must meet one another. they have to speak and listen and begin to recognize that they're not alone. And from there, they begin to share questions and experiences, to brainstorm responsibly, to articulate shared needs, to imagine what faithful Noahide life could look like in practice, and to work together under guidance rather than in isolation. What already exists in the Torah that has not yet been lived collectively? That's the work ahead. Now, imagine taking this one step further. Imagine what Noahide charitable institutions could look like. Imagine education that teaches moral responsibility from childhood, not as an abstraction, as a lived practice. Imagine learning centers where people gather regularly to study Torah guidance relevant to the 7 laws, to ask serious questions, to be challenged, and to grow. Imagine a kind of communal architecture that reflects dignity without imitation. Spaces that are designed for learning, for ethical deliberation, for charity and prayer to the one God. Not temples of triumph, houses of responsibility. And then imagine something that's even more demanding. Step forward into that role. Don't wait for permission that will never come. Don't wait for institutions that can't exist without people. Identify what you can bring to the table, whether that be time or skills or resources or your organizational ability, your financial support, or your teaching ability. Ask yourselves honestly, what forms of good can I help put in motion? What structures could exist if people like me took responsibility? What would it mean to build rather than to wait? I've said this before that, potentially there are 8 billion Noahides in the world. If each one of them gave $1 a year, you'd have an $8 billion budget. You could build everything and anything that was needed for this purpose. Because the world is not waiting to be debated. It's waiting to be perfected. Very important caveat, and it must be done in Hashem's name, with humility. We're not going to, we don't want to turn into every other communal institution, which is filled with the problem of power struggles and personality battles. That's not what we want here. We want humility, proper guidance, and that these things be done with the patience required to build something that lasts. Not an imitation of Judaism, not another religion, civilization itself. And it begins with something very small. People choosing responsibility over isolation. Remembering that humanity was created from one person. Why did God choose to create one being instead of an entire community? It's so that no one could claim moral superiority over another person. That's a Mishnah in Sanhedrin chapter 4. Every generation receives a difficult task. Ours might be this: to prove that humanity can stand before God without coercion, without replacement, without erasure. Faithful indifference, unified in responsibility. That's not a future fantasy. It's work. And it's already begun.